welcome to the National Academy of Sciences on this rainy evening. You get extra credit for being here through the wet. It's very funny. We haven't had rain for a month, and then we have this, and it rains. So kudos for you being here. We appreciate it. I'm J.D. Tolosik. I'm the Director of Cultural Programs here at the National Academy of Sciences. I see some faces that I recognize, others are new. Who's been to a DASER before? Almost everyone, almost. For those of you who have come back, welcome back, and welcome to those who are new. For those of you who are new, the DASER, which is also referred to as the DC Art Science Evening Rendezvous, is an ongoing series of discussions presented with the intent of fostering cross-disciplinary dialogue, as well as providing creative practitioners in all fields an opportunity for networking and discussion. So this marks our 13th year for the DASERs. DASERs are part of the Leonardo network, which fosters over 50 similar groups around the world, from Canada to Brazil, from California to Moscow. In fact, we are part of a growing number of practitioners who are interested in fostering more dialogue and collaboration across many domains of knowledge. In the spirit of DASER, and in fact, the mission of cultural programs here at the NAS is to explore the intersection of art, science, and culture, thinking about impact and possible trajectories of new ideals and connections. It seems more important now than ever to foster spaces where we can come together like this with an open mind and with empathy to share ideals and to imagine together a more diverse and inclusive future for all of us. And tonight we celebrate the exhibition of Xavier Cortada, whose career has been focused on just that, the fostering of conversations within communities and with policymakers to address concerns of climate change. And we look at this art and science interface from many different perspectives this evening through the lens of the work of our guests. And on stage with me today, we have Joshua Shannon, who is a professor of contemporary art history and theory at the University of Maryland. Jennifer Jurado, who is the Chief Resilience Officer and Deputy Director of the Resilient Environment Department, Broward County, Florida. And to Jennifer's left, we have Francisco de Caso, Principal Scientist, Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering, University of Miami. Welcome. And we have Xavier Cortada and Adam Roberti on the very far end. Xavier, of course, is an artist and professor of practice at the University of Miami, and Adam is a director of the Cortada Foundation. So please join me in welcoming our guests for this evening. And with no further ado, we're going to begin with you, Joshua, if you don't mind.
Gladly. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, JD, for the invitation, and Alana and many other folks here for all of the organizational help. It's a joy to be on this panel. I'm the one person here who isn't here today from Florida and hasn't collaborated with Xavier, and so I'm bringing a quite different perspective, and I'm meeting Xavier and this team here for the first time tonight, which is a joy. The reason I'm here is because I do look, as an art historian, I'm professionally an art historian, I do look at art and climate change in general, and I'm currently about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through writing a book for University of California Press, which I'm hoping to finish this summer, called How and Why to Look at Art in the Time of Climate Change. And the basic principal argument of this book is that if we are, as a species, to successfully face climate change, which we will one way or another on some time scale or another, some amount of suffering or another, we will, we need not only technical solutions, although absolutely we need those, and not only political solutions, although we absolutely need those, but we also need a fundamental reform of some of our most basic beliefs, that climate change is a problem we can't just innovate our way out of. We also have to unmake some of the myths and foundational ideas that our society and all of us have inherited from the Enlightenment and from industrial modernity. So the claim of the book is, if we look with a certain lens, an ecological lens and a climate lens, at key works of modern art, we might learn from them remaking of those beliefs in order to create the foundation of a literally sustainable modern civilization. That is, a modern civilization in which the activities that we undertake all the time can indefinitely be repeated, right? They're not one-time extractive events. They're ongoing events that future generations can engage in as well. So I thought in my few minutes here, I would just offer you a quick glimpse at 3 of the chapters, the first 3 chapters from the book, to give you a sense of what the book is trying to do. So the first one the first chapter is the only chapter in the book that actually addresses contemporary art that considers climate change explicitly. All of the other chapters in the book are about older art in which artists really weren't thinking about climate change, but from which we can still learn our sustainable beliefs. This chapter focuses on the artist of another Floridian. Do you guys know Anna Samoilova, any of you? She's a photographer, grew up in the Soviet Union, born in the early 80s, trained as an engineer, and then came to the United States to do an MFA and has become a quite successful photographer. She has a show up at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And she moved to Miami about 10 years ago and became immediately really intelligently plugged in to making what I think are some of the most successful artistic photographs of climate change we have. Part of what I love about her work, and you see a couple examples of it on the screen at the moment, is that it gets out of the usual way that we communicate visually about climate change. Usually, right, the only way we communicate visually about climate change is with photojournalistic images of disaster or with graphs and tables. What Anna Samoilova manages to do is to produce instead this sympathetic record for us of the really weird, uncanny feeling of living in these early years of the severe period of climate change, in which we are constantly faced with the question, is this normal? Was it always like this? Or is this really weird? And so she makes these photographs where things are just a little bit too wet. Sometimes for reasons that actually have nothing to do with climate change. Sometimes it's just a pool that got overfilled or something. But there's the sense, right, that things are just constantly a little bit inundated. The second chapter does go back, and there's kind of roughly the book goes in back from the 19th century towards the present in the following chapters. The second chapter is called Seeing Beyond the Human, and the key artist, although there are other artists in the chapter, the key artist here is Vincent van Gogh, in part because I think what's really turns out is most interesting about his work is that he was a person who had some difficulty getting along with other human beings, I think really fundamentally understanding other human beings, but was super plugged into other organisms. And so he's a real model, I think, for us of actually unlearning one of our most basic modern beliefs, which is the specialness and uniqueness of the human being and our preoccupation with ourselves and each other. And so in a painting that hangs less than a mile from where we're sitting in the Phillips collection here in Washington, for example, The Road Menders from 1889, you see a painting that the title suggests is actually about human beings. It names human beings in the title, but really the human beings are a secondary figure in a drama here that has to do with much, much bigger and older organisms. These gigantic plane trees in the town of Arles in Provence, where Van Gogh was living at the time. And you see that, in fact, the reason that the road has to even be repaired is because the trees have grown so great that their roots have thrown the stones out of square, and a new street needs to be laid. Or, to take the final example that I can offer you today, the third chapter is called Suffering and Resilience, and it focuses on another group of paintings that are here in Washington, or at least half of them are, the other half are in New York. This remarkable series by the American artist Jacob Lawrence, who during World War II painted a series of 40 panels, little panels like this, tempera panels on board, that narrate in their own kind of elusive way the story of the Great Migration, the massive move of millions of African Americans from the US South to the North, industrial North, primarily between World War I and World War II. And it's a story, of course, about racism. It's a story about suffering. It's a story about people banding together and succeeding and finding resilience and strength. It is also, interestingly, a story about climate change, because Lawrence is quite direct about the fact that in addition to harsh racist treatment, the Great Migration was in part propelled by pests, by massive floods around the Mississippi, by droughts. And so in the very early part of the series, panel 3, which you see on the upper left here, he paints the migrating human beings in sympathy with, visually, the migrating birds going from south to north. So he establishes that bond of migration across species, even as he tells a story that is social and ecological at the same time. So I think it's a work that serves as a model for us in a difficult period for ways to remember our solidarity with each other and with other species as we find a way to succeed under hardship. So that's a quick glimpse at some parts of my work, and it's just a kind of context in which I'm really excited to hear about the collaborations that have been going on in Broward and Miami-Dade that you'll hear about for the rest of the night.
Joshua, thank you. So now, those of you who have been here before know that our panels are diverse. And we're so glad to have Jennifer here with us to talk about something completely different, but yet the same. So welcome, Jennifer.
Is the mic working okay, yes? Okay, good, thank you. Well, I very much appreciated hearing you speak, Joshua, and I think that it's going to be evident why it's so important to have different communicators participate in this conversation, because I certainly do not communicate in such a beautiful way. But I do want to share, so working in Broward County, we are a very coastal community in South Florida, 31 cities, very subject to extreme flooding associated with sea level rise, extreme rainfall, groundwater table rise, coupled with other climate risks of heat. We've been fully immersed in planning and adapting to climate change for nearly 20 years. We've early community that appreciated what was happening, and really strong leadership around these issues. But one of the things that we know is very exhausting and trying and difficult, more so I would say than planning for the adaptation needs, is the engagement of the full community of 2 million residents, very diverse, very transient population, when we think about the challenges and the investments that are going to be needed near, mid, and long term. We have been able to advance a lot of what's needed through basic policy and planning, things that we can handle at a technical level. But when we really look at what's coming next, we appreciate that we have been severely limited by our inability to engage with the community in the way that we need. And unfortunately, for most of these 20 years, it's been principally academic or bureaucratic conversation that's really been kind of one-sided. And you have a conversation, you leave and not really sure what happens. But what we do know is that every time we have a conversation, no one's heard about what we're talking about. So we have a real deep communications challenge in our community. But we've made these massive investments. I mean, it's constant, whether we're talking about our communication strategies online and written form. We've got the action plans, we've got the toolbox, we've got student forums. We've been engaging with the Broward School District, the 6th largest in the United States, for many, many years, and prominent forums with the students in attendance, the various surveys, social media. I mean, we have tried to evolve and utilize the communication tools that are so very typical. But again, bringing the online forums, major convenings every year, multiple times a year, very engaged in the way of the partners that we're bringing in, we still find the community voice to be elusive. that we don't have this grassroots campaign. We haven't had residents begging, urging solutions, and as we get ready to advance what's going to be nearly a $20 to $30 billion capital improvement program, we're going to have much more in the way of citizen appreciation of what's at stake and the immediate interest of the population today and the long-term consequence of a community that we all care about really hinging upon what happens next. And so appreciating this, this challenge, we had the just immense benefit of an exposure that occurred through our annual Youth Climate Summit, where Adam was in attendance and he was presenting the work of Xavier, and I looked at that with deep envy. Our mayor was in attendance. We were completely taken aback with the communications approach, the response of the students in the room. And knowing that Xavier had this history of working very productively down in Miami-Dade County, we thought we want some of that and we want to bring it up to Broward. We were able to engage our climate change task force with a call for financial support in order to enable this partnership. And this last year, we have had the immense benefit of working on the underwater campaign, having brought that to Broward County. What does it look like? Well, so powerful in so many ways was the engagement at 10 different public schools where Xavier held workshops, engaged with the students, involved them in the creation of signage where they would personally identify, I'm sure going to hear so much more about it, so I won't need to elaborate, but their personal elevation relative to sea level rise, allowing what do I personally have at risk? What is my, things that I care about that are valuable to me? How do they sit relative to the risk that we have in our community? But it was the delivery, the conversation, the connection that Xavier had with the students. It wasn't merely an art exercise or the academic, let me find my elevation. So it was this powerful engagement with the students, at the same time creating the art mural within the school, which was so different from our typical conversations where we have a conversation and there's nothing left behind to spur the continuation. And what was really powerful about what Xavier said after this engagement was the agency that those students were left with, that they became the purveyors of this very special knowledge, because not every student had participated. This group of students who'd had the benefit of that relationship, they were now able to talk about the power of the mural and what it was communicating. And it's there now every year for every subsequent class of students to have conversation and additional engagement around. So this was the very first of the schools, but again, Xavier and Adam and his team were able to visit all 10 of the initial schools that we partnered with in this conversation, examples of the art left behind, the size of the participation, diversity of the students engaged in the conversation, but that was just one element. We also have an annual event, our Water Matters Day event, attended by about 3,000. We brought in Xavier as our keynote speaker. We had a bus wrap with the underwater art that had been traveling around Broward County for months in advance of the Water Matters Day event, and he delivered his workshop in a phenomenal presentation at Water Matters Day, discussing, again, the connections between community, climate, and the water, either shortages or extremes, and what that means in our community. He also served as a keynote speaker for our very first Central County Climate Conversation, where, again, we've not had an established forum where the community could actually come together and talk openly about how climate is affecting their lives and understand more what's happening in the way and the tools that they have to better engage and look and support the solutions that they need in their community. And it's kind of a funny spot where we work at the county versus the municipal level. So this was a really important conversation held at the African American Library and Research Institution. Currently, we're also working on, and in fact, the installation on the right is being installed today and yesterday. I think we just put out the social media.
Excellent. Yeah,
So
just got done.
this is our government center garage in downtown Fort Lauderdale, where we had 3 feet of flooding in April of 23 with a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event. And this marks the elevation of our county garage relative to sea level. Almost everything in our county is 9 feet or lower, and the number 4 in the picture on the left is right outside of our commission chambers. So every time we have a commission meeting and we're just getting ready to make this installation, will be this visible reminder of the elevation of our county building and a centerpiece for conversation for leadership and all of the public that comes in. So again, so very different from the types of conversations and who's been leading those conversations. It's emotional, and I've said it before, it's a very emotional experience to be in the room. So very different from the way that any of myself, my peers, we communicate. So grateful for that conversation. And in fact, it's been so productive that we were able to secure additional funds for this next year to bring Xavier and Adam back to work with another 10 schools. We worked with the Community Foundation of Broward in order to provide the support. Our Cultural Affairs group division was part of that cost share funding. We've engaged a youth leadership group that is now Leadership Broward. They're leading this underwater conversation in our community. So it's really been about passing off that knowledge, the communications capacity, the leadership, the voice, and utilizing art as a stimulating tool to help spur the conversation, the dialogue, and open up hearts. So thank you, Xavier. We've just been thrilled with the collaboration. And congratulations on your exhibit here.
Thank you.
Francisco, now you would think that if we were going to have a scientist here on the panel, that we would do the obvious, have a climate scientist, but we didn't. We have Francisco, who is architecture, engineering, material science, and we're going to talk about concrete.
Pretty much. And I think,
So welcome.
thank you. And thank you for having us. And again, congratulations on the exhibit. I'm assure you I'm not putting you to sleep. Okay, that's number one. I'm passionate about concrete, and I have one question, and I hope I plant a seed today on all of your minds to change your perspective on concrete. And we were talking before, Jeffrey, what is art, right? And something that lasts and it communicates and whatnot. And how does concrete play a role in art, right? Well, if you don't know what concrete is, does anybody know what concrete is? Please go ahead and raise your hand if you know what concrete is made out of. The 3 basic ingredients of concrete. Excellent, good, so this will be a good time. So I think Xavier and myself really saw on the initial conversations the many dualities that concrete has, right? It can be it possesses a lot of amazing things, and you mentioned as well how Jeffrey is really interesting concrete. It can be fluid, it flows like a liquid, and then it turns really solid hard, like a rock. It is rock after all. It can be very smooth, right? Shiny like glass, but also very rough like sandpaper. It can certainly last millennia, right? Or it can certainly crumble many times because of corrosion of the steel that it's inside. It can be curved, it can be bent into any shape, or it can be pretty squared and edgy, right? It can take any form, right? Because it starts as a liquid. So it certainly gives us an ability to express many things in the building that we're here today. And I think we quickly realized that this duplicity was, and I never realized until I spoke with Xavier, was something that we could leverage from an artistic point of view. Not only that, you mentioned it, Jennifer, before, something that lasts, right? Those numbers that you see, that artwork that is in the building, is there to be permanent, right? And things that become permanent is a constant reminder on ourselves, and it sort of brings us back to what is it that we're doing, what is the question that we're doing, what is the purpose, you know? There's the rule of the 1%. Just get 1% better today, and you eventually get there, right? So this was really an innovative way that I didn't really understand what Xavier wanted to do at the beginning. So let's go to Concrete 101, right? Concrete has three basic elements. It's got cement, which is the gray stuff, right? The powder is a fine powder that binds together when it reacts with water. There's a chemical reaction called hydrolysis, and it binds the rocks and the sands together. And through the process of hydration, it creates these little bonds, and it becomes like an adhesive, cement does. And what is cement? Cement is limestone, rock, a lot of different type of cementitious materials blended and put at very high temperature. And that's basically concrete, right? And concrete has been around for some time. This is a Gobelin temple in modern Italy. It dates to 10,000 before Christ. It's one of the first settlements where limestone rock was used in order to bind the rocks as a cementitious material. So it's certainly been around for some time, and if we were to look at a very brief history of concrete, we could go 10,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 before Christ with the Egyptians and all across. I love the U.S. interstate system is based on concrete, right? Concrete pulls the country together, believe it or not, right? Into the many high rises and domes. And it is because there's so much about it, right? We use a lot of concrete. In fact, so much, 10 billion ton annual production, more than twice of all the other building materials that you might traditionally think of, right? Steel, wood, plastics, aluminum. Put all of them together, times it by 2, concrete goes beyond that, right? And we use so much of it that the only other man-made material that is exceeded in mass is fresh water. Yes, fresh water is a man-made material. Right? We clean it, we chlorinate it, we make it safe so we can use it. Right? After water, concrete is the most used in the world. So there's a lot of it, right? And it is because we use a lot of it that this material is typically seen as the bad guy when it comes to climate change. And hopefully I can get there on that conversation. But this graph, and this is the only graph I will show, I promise, on the lower left corner, you see where the concrete lives, in that little lower quadrant. That means that concrete actually is a low embodied energy material. It doesn't take a lot of energy to make concrete, right? It's a cementitious material. It's based on cementitious. So the amount of energy to make concrete is minimal compared to your steels and your timbers and your plastics and all the other products. It's just, we use a lot of it. I always like the analogy, if you have a car and you leave it on the driveway, it's going to be the most fuel efficient and most green car in the world. You don't use it, it doesn't emit, right? And concrete is the same thing. We use a lot of it, and for that reason, it really creates 8% of the global emissions. And for that reason, we see it everywhere, right? We see it in our roads, we see it in our bridges, we certainly see it in all the structures above and below ground. Some structures that we might not think too much. Our energy infrastructure grid system relies on concrete, and obviously below ground, our tunnels, our metros, our not so sexy structures like moving water around. The foundations of this building all rely on concrete. Even if you have a wood building, your foundation, your slab on grade is still concrete, right? And that hopefully brings us to this partnership. And how can we get concrete, a material that is everywhere, a material that has been used to build civilization upon? How do we turn it into something that can be helpful and last forever, right? Hopefully not in the way that will happen or not. We don't know, right? So this is one of the parks that you can see on the lower left, the concrete sculpture that was made with sustainable concrete. And I'm going to briefly take a few minutes to talk about that was installed through our Xavier's art. And this is where we are at right now. We are in the decade to deliver. The concrete and cement industry is really on a roadmap that by 2050 will become decarbonized. That means that whatever energy is used to make concrete, it will become zero through the different ways. And how are those different ways? Well, I guess I lied to you. This is the second graph. No more graphs. All those different colors represent the amount of CO2 that we have to eliminate to become zero. And from the top, you see design and efficiency. We come down to efficiency of concrete production, saving in cementitious binders and the cement component ingredient of concrete, as well as saving in clinker production, which is related to concrete, carbon capture, energy, and CO2 sink. So these are all the different levers that we really need to use all of them in order to decarbonize. And how do we come back to this installation? And I'm sure Xavier will talk about the protocol of how these markers, this concrete, sustainable concrete markers that are installed in the parks are inaugurated. How does it come to it? And how do we come with this idea of sustainable concrete that is actually part of the solution towards climate change, part of the $1 million of investments that many communities need to do in order to become resilient will depend on concrete. Well, concrete uses a lot of energy because cement requires energy to produce it. Concrete uses billions of tons of water, right? We need that water to create the chemical reaction. And guess what? A lot of the concrete that we no longer need gets crushed and dumped into a landfill most of the times. We cannot use that concrete because it's contaminated. It has high chloride levels, and we don't like chloride in concrete, and I'll explain why. And all this translates to that we really, what do we do to redefine? What is it that we can change, right? And this is really not only as a scientist or as an engineer, but if you have these three basic ingredients, right? Let's go back to them. What can you change? There's three things that we can change. That's pretty much it, right? So part of the proposal and the conversation when Xavier learned about what we were doing is that, you know what, we can do all three, right? We can eliminate the use of fresh water, but we need some other alternative water. That would be salt water. Plenty of it around, right? For the sand and the aggregate, right, the rocks that we're trying to bind together, we could use what we call offshore sand, which it's got salt water, and obviously it's not ideal for reasons that you can already imagine, or what we also call recycled concrete aggregate, right? That demolition waste that goes into a landfill is also called RCA. So we could also use that. And we could use alternative cements, usually referred to SCMs, or supplemental cementitious materials, that take less energy to produce. So it's less energy intense, right? So these are different levers that we can do. But if we were to do this change, right, in order to reduce the overall CO2 of the concrete, right, we can impact all those different areas that we already mentioned, especially the top half. But there's something that probably you're all thinking. What are you thinking? I'm mad if I were to do this. Anybody? We certainly cannot do this, right? It's one reason, and it's corrosion, right? Salt water in concrete screams corrosion, right? Because concrete or reinforced concrete has steel inside. And the problem here becomes the steel, right? Because it's metallic and it reacts. But if we were to replace it with something that is non-metallic, then that allows for the opportunity to create and use all those levers. And what you see here are fiber reinforced polymer bars. That's part of the work that I do at the University of Miami. And that's exactly what we put inside of Xavier's elements. And it got featured into the Concrete International magazine. So I think this is amazing to show that. And I'm going to briefly go through the process that Xavier will dwell into on how do we create and turn concrete or atom into that. So this is what we started with. This is Xavier's work. This is how we create a base or a canvas for him to then go in and use the clay and model it into the artistic expressions that he wanted to, in order to then to create, you know, a hard positive. And from that, we create a silicon mold, and there's an example on the exhibit, which we then mix those amazing ingredients to then create a hard positive. So we revert and we create that three-dimensional number that was first painted. And then we definitely mix those concrete elements, put them together, and then transport it, logistics, and install it into the parks. And definitely, you know, this is a learning curve for many ways, because now people wonder, what is this? And I think, should I encourage everybody to touch the artwork on the?
Absolutely.
So I think, I know you said that before.
I said yes.
So it's on the record, so please touch it, please feel it. You know, concrete is, And obviously this is not only the work that I do, is I have to appreciate my team's work and all the researchers in the lab that have supported the work in order to put this together. And hopefully with that, I've planted a little seed, and you're more appreciative of what concrete and the role that concrete plays in all of your lives. And with that, thank you for your time.
So I think I'll have you hold this, Adam. It's an honor for me to be here at the National Academies to talk about science, and I feel bad for you guys because I really don't see you, so I guess I'll just stand up. To talk a little bit about science and about art. In the exhibit outside, the solo show about climate science art, you see works that I created with the National Science Foundation at the South Pole, in McMurdo, but at the South Pole as well, as a way of trying to have us understand our vulnerability to climate. And then a year later, with the support of the New York Foundation for the Arts, I took the climate art project to the North Pole on a Russian icebreaker. And outside you'll see a series of watercolors that have my name on them, but I didn't make them. Melting ice made them. The melting ice in Antarctica and the ice that melted on an icebreaker as it crushed its way across the pole. And in many ways, those pieces mark a moment in time. They mark frozen ice, frozen sea ice in the Arctic, something that if we continue polluting our planet the way we're doing now, and if we continue electing officials into our government as we do now, and if we continue having the kind of COP meetings like the kind we have now, I can promise you an ice-free Arctic and hell for all the inhabitants of the planet below. So that trajectory, that climate project that I initiated at the poles, I did so to bring awareness to every point in between. And one of the most compelling, because of its engagement, aspects of that work is the underwater. And I would like to bring Adam Roberti, the executive director of the Cortada Foundation, to the podium to talk a little bit about the underwater, a socially engaged art project that I developed, featured in the exhibit, as a way of helping my neighbors prepare for a future with rising seas. Adam?
Good evening, everyone. So, what you've already heard a little bit about today is the Underwater Project, and it's a socially engaged art project for a large-scale, interactive public art campaign. And what it's really trying to do is it's trying to develop a broad base of people who are going to champion environmental justice. It's trying to build that broad base of people who are going to get the political will that we need for systemic change. And when we talk about the underwater in Broward County or in Miami-Dade County, we want to ground everybody in the reality that we're facing, which is 6 feet of sea level rise, potentially 7 feet of sea level rise by the end of this century, if we don't stop burning fossil fuels as soon as possible. I am from Broward County. My family lives in Hollywood, which is the center of this map, and it will not be here because of the limestone rock that we are built on top of. Xavier's hometown, Miami-Dade, looks like this, with 6 feet of sea level rise. And I know we're preaching to the choir here, but I want you guys to understand that most people in these two maps have no idea what we are talking about. Most people are not aware of the vulnerability that we are facing. Yes, it floods when there's a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event. It floods, and people know that flooding is generally an issue. But people joke about Miami becoming Atlantis. People are not taking sea level rise or the climate crisis very seriously. And as Xavier was just explaining, he was first introduced to this crisis at the South Pole through the National Science Foundation, and then the following year at the North Pole. He didn't just create ice paintings, he created a number of different works. On the left is something called the longitudinal installation around the South Pole. That one is all about climate and empathy. And the one on the right is called Native Flags, and that launched a global reforestation effort. And if you go to our website, you can see all about those projects, but I'm gonna stick to the ice painting here. And when Xavier was there, as he started to talk about, he met with glaciologists, and they handed him ice and said, basically this ice is melting rapidly and is threatening to melt the only place that you have ever called home, Miami. And so, although he went to the South Pole, to Antarctica, with bright colors, expecting to paint in the ways that he typically does, ways that are very bright and vibrant, he ended up creating things that were very pale. And these Antarctic ice paintings that he created are just that, ice that is made with Antarctica, by Antarctica, but it's about where Antarctica is going, and that is our coastlines. And if Xavier was a traditional artist, he would just take these ice paintings and he would put them in a gallery, put them in a museum, and that has happened. But he didn't want just the few people who would walk those corridors to see his work. He wanted to bring it into the community. And so this is where, as you were starting to hear Jennifer talk about, the underwater was born. He brought Antarctica to the front yards of residents just many years earlier than we're currently expecting. And he put an ambiguous number on top. And if you were walking down the street and you saw this number 8, you would be like, why the heck is there a number 8 in front of this guy's house? You'd be like, what is this doing here? It's weird, it's strange, it's odd, and it makes you do a double take. And that 8 means that that house is at 8 feet above sea level. And it is a catalyst for conversation. And at the same time that residents were putting these yard signs in front of their homes, Xavier worked with high schoolers in Pinecrest, this is South Miami area, to create a number of different elevation intersection murals. So again, you can imagine driving down this street that never had a mural on it before, and you end up seeing, let's see if it works for me, that. Why is there a number 7 in the middle of the street? What is that doing here, right? But obviously the imagery here connects to the imagery that's on the yard sign, and now you have neighbors talking about these numbers and what does it all mean and what's happening. And then realtors getting upset, and there's a whole there's a whole process that comes with this. But it catalyzes conversations and it catalyzes convenings and community meetings. And this, when this project first started, it was called the Underwater Homeowners Association. The Underwater HOA was this project in its genesis. And so it was really just people of one city coming together and having conversations about what are we going to do, right? And so this monthly meetings were happening, and then COVID happened. And actually it was in COVID where the Cortada Foundation was born, right? So the Cortada Foundation as a nonprofit, you can think of us like the operations arm behind Xavier as an individual artist. We are working to amplify and scale these projects up. So coming out of COVID, we worked with Xavier's alma mater, Miami Senior High School, the oldest high school in Miami, to go up and down Calle Ocho, 8th Street, very popular place for foods and drinks and dancing. And the students were the ones who wanted to go door to door, shop to shop, and engage their community around this issue. So over the course of just one day, you had these yard signs popping up all over the place in windows and in grass storefronts. And so this project has gained momentum in this way through students, as Jennifer was talking about in Broward County, but then as Francisco was talking about across Miami-Dade County, through parks. And the impressive part here that we want to make sure that everybody here understands is, it's not just we're creating one sculpture of a number 2 and putting it in a park. Xavier was appointed by the mayor of Miami-Dade County to be the first ever artist in residence of the county. And through that appointment, he was able to work with the Parks and Rec Department to install, and this is what we're working on right now with Francisco and his team, to install every single Miami-Dade County public park with a site-specific elevation sculpture. Over 250 parks, all across Northeast, Southwest, are getting portals for climate education and information and advocacy. And as you can see from the picture that Francisco showed earlier and in here, every one of these sculptures has a QR code embedded in it. So if you're walking down the sidewalk with your son asks, Dad, what is this number 10 doing here? Dad has no idea. He's gonna want to appease his child and scan that QR code. And when you scan that QR code, it brings you to our website. And the QR code is now embedded in every single yard sign, every mural that we put up puts a sign next to it with the QR code, and it brings you here where you see those gifts. You understand sea level rise is a problem here in South Florida, but then what's important here is that it allows you to type your address and find your elevation. So now climate change, which seems like a far away distant issue for most people, becomes personal. My house is at 4 feet above sea level, 6 feet above sea level. Oh crap. And what's important here then is that once climate change becomes personalized, there is then a way to take action. And as many people in this room are aware, it can seem overwhelming and sad and depressing, and action is the antidote to despair. We need to be doing something about it, and we need to be doing it collectively. We can't just be going at this individually. So how do we grow this installation through these yard signs? How do we contact our policymakers and let them know that this is an issue, right? Like in Broward County. How do we get involved with local organizations? We created a list of nonprofits all across Miami-Dade and in Broward for the people who get involved with our project so that they can volunteer and join other folks, other initiatives that are obviously super important and that we don't necessarily have the capacity to support. And lastly, we created something called the Underwater Intel, and that project is an online resource hub, podcasts, videos, book recommendations, et cetera, so that folks can learn more now that they are hopefully motivated to dive in. This initiative, as it's been growing all across Miami-Dade and all across Broward County, has gotten a lot of attention and is part of Xavier's TED Talk from a couple of years ago. It's all about the underwater and also the reclamation project, which is all focused on mangrove restoration and reforestation, but obviously community engagement and having people have a sense of agency, and that's what all of our work tries to do. And what's important for us, everybody in this room, I think, is how do we reach out to those audiences who are not having these conversations? How do we get people to care and want to learn more and become those eco-emissaries, as Xavier likes to say, become the leaders who are going to share this with their friends and their family? And because it's so visual, because this project is visually appealing, journalists like to cover it. It's gotten a lot of press. Most recently, Xavier was featured on PBS NewsHour, talking with Jeffrey Brown all about this work. It's been recognized, obviously, by the National Academies. It was recently, last year, in this report by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Creative Capital awarded Xavier a big grant to support this work. So what we hope to convey here is that in this climate fight, we need to start to be creative and innovative with how we are reaching people, because clearly we're failing, and we need to try to figure out new ways. As Jennifer was saying, like, they were struggling, and understanding that art can actually play a key role in community engagement and advocacy is really important. So I think with that, I will leave this here, and I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great, thanks. Great job, Adam. Great job, thank you. So tonight I want to share with you static noise. Do I do that? So tonight, what do I do, JD?
You might want to turn your
Turn this off?
lavalier off and use the mics.
All right.
Is that better? Turn it back on. Don't listen to
Hello.
me.
Don't
Listen to
listen to
Mario.
JD.
Mario knows.
Okay, can we, are we good, Mario? Thank you. So tonight I want to share with you the crux of my work. What I see as a formula, I am in the National Academies of Sciences, right? So the formula for activating real climate action. You know, in any chemical reaction, you need these components, these agents. And when it comes to tackling the climate crisis, we think of policy and we think of science, and somehow we feel that that's going to give us the reaction that we're looking for, the result we're looking for. And it could, but we sort of need an accelerant because we are in the middle of a climate catastrophe. We need a sense of urgency that, in all candor, November 5th tells us isn't responding as it should to the climate catastrophe that befalls us. We need, in chemical reaction speak, a catalyst to accelerate that reaction. And I believe in my core, because humans have taught us this since humans evolved into humans, that art is that catalyst, that art is that force that can propel us into a new reality, can propel us into a new world where communities will understand their vulnerability to the climate crisis. But more importantly, they'll feel responsible. They'll feel that the issue is personal to them and that they have a role, that they have a sense of agency, individually, a sense of agency a role, a voice in tackling the climate catastrophe that befalls us now. And what I'd like to invite you to is to explore the power of adding this catalyst to your equation, adding the power of art to transform the way you do your work as scientists, to add the power of art as a way you engage community as policymakers and people in the public sector, and to bring that innovation, that creativity, that role, that communal power of art into life. And let me talk a little bit about the chemicals I'm talking about here, because of course, when you're adding stuff to a reaction, it matters that you get the chemicals right. When I say art, I speak broadly about what I mean by art. I think of art as this very elastic thing. I hardly would insult art to confine it to four corners of a frame or a drawing or a wall or a piece of paper. Art is us, and all of us are artists. Art is our ability to conceptualize ideas and share them with one another. Art gives us the power to take what we think about and transfer it to someone else, but importantly, in that process, in that interstitial space, allows you to open yourself up to think about something differently, to see it differently, importantly, to feel, to connect. And it disarms you. You're not coming to a meeting armed with your statistics. You're not listening to someone who you're trying to refute. You are in a creative space, in a communal space, stuff that our ancestors have been doing since they were painting rocks in Australia and caves in Altamira. You're engaging in this creative, interactive process that allows you to open yourself to different ways of thinking, listening, feeling, and communicating. And I believe that it's in that particular space that we can begin to create the change. And we've seen it in the underwater. Through the underwater, we targeted specific systems. We targeted education, scientific education, environmental education, working with secondary schools, working with universities, infiltrating the different institutions to effectuate change. Within cultural institutions, I am the immediate past chair of our Cultural Affairs Council in Miami. I instituted a green task force so that cultural institutions would walk the walk before they would talk the talk. In time, and what I'm trying to do is lessen the suffering by have us address climate now, but in time, there will not be a cultural institution that won't be talking, addressing, performing, screening, exhibiting work about climate. Because it will be everything for everyone across this planet as we continue ushering in warmer and warmer summers, as we continue bringing in more Category 5 hurricanes that churn slowly, but are also wetter, bringing destruction. And in time, the water will come, and unlike a hurricane storm surge, it will not recede. In time, there will not be a FEMA at every place where land touches water. And the food scarcity that will come in time will cause the kind of climate migrations and famine that no wall can stop. But we as a society don't respond to that now. Our art should be more than reflect on it. Art is powerful enough to act on it, to convene, to inspire, to motivate, and to engage our society in doing something. And what I'm requesting you to do is to join me in this concert of creativity. Where you stand, where you are, and what you do, to bring creativity into the work you do, and in so doing to engage community. And that's another transformative aspect of I want to do. I want to shift the policy of what community engagement means To many of us, engagement is counting how many chairs are in a room, irrespective of who sits in that chair, or more importantly, what happens when they leave the room after they've listened to your talk in that chair. True community engagement is like community organizing, and what it has at its core is valuing the community's wisdom. And I think science has been silent to the community wisdom. We are so concerned about our focus, what we're targeting, and in the art world, so concerned about the art critic, that we forget the whole purpose of what we do as scientists and artists, which is to help us as a society better understand our world. The role of an artist and a scientist who have the ability to imagine something that's not in front of us now, to experiment, to hypothesize a truth that has yet to be proven, to create a piece of art that had yet to be created, to imagine something that isn't, to bring the rest of society along to better understand itself. How dare you hide that creativity from the rest of humanity? And how dare you not engage humanity in that discourse? Well, too often we relegate art and science to these silos, to these places that abandon the very purpose of their existence. So as an artist, my job, I think, is to try to help inspire society to see its power and its role in doing that. We're trying to catalyze shifts in narrative, allowing us to to talk across boundaries. The work you have outside is very science, climate specific. But just like that, I have worked with theoretical physicists, with population geneticists, talking about the power of art and science to inspire and motivate people. We are at a really important time in our nation, but also at a very important time in our world. Calamity surrounds us. And when it comes to climate, the days could not be darker. If we did what we are doing now, and we apparently will be doing less, my home will be underwater by the end of the century. And the millions of people who migrated like my parents did from places that displaced them because of some external force, in my case, communism in Cuba, made my parents refugees, are going to now be climate refugees and have to move. And the economies that hold us together will begin to dissolve. We are in a precarious place. And I posit that we need to do something a little bit differently. In fact, radically differently. I invite you to go back to the thing that ancestors gave you and the things that gave them their humanity. Go back to art as a catalyst to accelerate our movement, to be more human again, and to show more love to one another again. Thank you very much.
Well, there's so many portals by which we could enter into this discussion. And I do want to let you know so that you can be preparing questions that you might have. We do have microphones. We're going to turn it over to Q&A very shortly, but I get first shot, so this is very fun for me. One of the things, rather than trying to formulate a question, I'm gonna kind of summarize some things that I heard that I think are really interesting, and that is that all of you in some way started off with you, Joshua, you're talking about changing perception, how artists help us change our perception. Francisco, you did the exact same thing. You started off your conversation saying, I want to change your perception about concrete and the way that we view this. And of course, the ideal of art as a catalyst. You know, there's so many times in this context, it's an easy fit to try to understand what this is by thinking of art as science communication. Science communication was not mentioned once on the stage. And I appreciate that, because what is also interesting to me, and Xavier started down this, but as a curator of this exhibit, I became very aware early on that the objects that we're showing are not really what you consider the artwork.
Right.
And the ideal of social sculpture, and I'd love to hear, Joshua, you talk about the ideal of the different mediums, but social engagement as medium.
Huh?
And so how do you populate a gallery in a way that you really emphasize, that you tell this story, that you're looking at objects that are artifacts, that are the artifacts of a process. So these are some of the things that I'm kind of thinking about. I really enjoy this idea of medium, of it being a different type of medium, but I wonder if we could start with that question of, this idea of art as catalyst. And maybe, Joshua, we could start with you, because you bring this sort of historic perspective of a traditional way of looking, but your perspective, and what I loved about your talk, is that it takes us beyond that.
Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. I would add just that I think it's true that what we come to art for is the ways in which it doesn't obey the lines of thought in most of the rest of our lives. So when you see art that you respond to strongly, the strength of your response has to do with the way that it pushes you outside of the patterns that you're normally in. And this is an old idea, but I really believe in it, and I think Xavier put it nicely just a minute ago. But I'll also credit, for those of you, which I presume is most people in the room who are really interested in this topic, I'll recommend this very slim little beautiful penguin paperback by the philosopher Timothy Morton, who's written a lot about philosophy having to do with climate change. And Morton's recent book is called All Art is Ecological. And it's meant to be a slightly provocative argument, but the claim is a little bit in the spirit of what Xavier was just saying, that art, by pushing us outside of the frames of thought that we're normally in, is a mechanism by which we remake those frames of thought. And it's possible, if you engage deeply with art, to really become a person who thinks about things differently. And you can do that in the gallery. And, as Xavier and I were talking briefly before the panel, and I said, well, yeah, I love gallery and museum art, and my book is mostly about gallery and museum art. But what's remarkable about the work that everyone here has been talking about tonight is that it isn't in that context. And I think I like your use of the phrase social sculpture, because it asks the work to be primarily a set of relationships rather than a series of objects. And it puts the emphasis, therefore, on those things that are happening when you're looking that transform not only how you think, but how you relate to other people in the community, right? And so that's pretty exciting.
Anybody else like to respond?
I'm going to add that everybody in the lab turned into artists, right? And it's through that process of the activity, even the making, even the figuring the things out, and how would you put all these items together so that it makes sense, and bring all the individuals from the graduate students to the undergraduate students to the technicians to figuring it out and being behind that. So I think, as you said, they were all changed. Their minds changed on the activities that we do in our lab. It is no longer about breaking or testing this material, whatnot, but how do we use the same activities for a different purpose? So I guess is that relationship changed even in my own environment. So it made me rather uncomfortable at the beginning, but I think that process was very exciting, and it changed everybody's mind. So I think I doubled down on that, yeah.
At the end, it is relational. I mean, that's all this is about. It's about how we relate to one another and to ourselves. In the case of working with you, what you and I were trying to do, what I was trying to do, is get the concrete industry to pivot towards sustainable concrete, but by giving them a gift, which is you get 250 platforms to showcase a new way of making a climate solution for the buildings that are corroding all across and doing it in a way that lowers the carbon that we emit. So all of the projects that I create are textured and layered, and it's all about inspiring or evoking a kind of response, changing what we currently have, because what we have now isn't working. And part of what I do is I try to change systems, including the art world. I think the art world is complicit in many ways. I think there's a reason why there's so much distrust in the art world, because too often it makes art a commodity as opposed to life. You know, it literally imprisons it within the constraints of what is its worth. And there's nothing more valuable than the creativity that we share with one another, but somehow we think about what it's going to happen with it, how it's going to appreciate in value, as opposed to understanding the value that it currently has. And that's what my mission is to use it at these different levels. And I try to be strategic about it. I value cultural institutions, so I try to model and show cultural institutions to do it, which is why those ice paintings are in museum collections and have been in galleries. But their real purpose, and when they really came to life, wasn't when it was acquired by, into a permanent collection of a museum. Its real value happened when people put it in their front yards and had the audacity to say, yeah, my home's at 6 feet above sea level, and tell their neighbor the same thing. A neighbor that would otherwise say, climate is a hoax, but now there's a trusted source, not some nonprofit group knocking on their door with a pamphlet, but your neighbor telling you, man, we're in the same boat here. What are we going to do about this? And just sparking that conversation, changing the relationship and the tenor, is what social sculpting, social engaged arts to do. So yeah, what you have out there is an exhibit of residue. That's what it is. It's residue. It's the stuff I used to make the real art, and the art is that interaction between people.
I'm going to throw this open to questions, so if you have questions, you might want to go to the microphone so we can have a thing. But I do want to back up and talk about the relationship and the process. It's before that, it's actually these collaborations that form. In a few days, PBS is going to be releasing another documentary on Da Vinci, the sole genius. And we know from looking at science publications, you don't have a single person doing the research, it's teams.
Absolutely.
And art, as you've exhibited it here, your artwork is a team effort. So it's not just about engaging people with an ideal, it's engaging people and making it all come together. So not only the communities, but policymakers, scientists, everybody that you've incorporated. This is like a very powerful model to me. So having said that, I think we're starting to get some interest from our community here. And a question. Thank you for going to the microphone so that we can have a recording of it. What's your question?
Sure. Well, actually, I have one question for the architect, the structural engineer, Mr. Caso, and then a comment for Mr.
Cortada.
Cardoso. Okay. The first one is, you didn't talk about what's the difference between the real concrete, the one that is currently in use, versus your zero carbon concrete in terms of the physical strength. It is going to support and be able to make a majestic building than this one? That's my question. To go a little bit, no in the detail of the signs, but whether it's going to be of the quality to, for example, build buildings in areas where there's a lot of earthquakes or, disasters. That's my question. Now, for the other gentleman, well, I admire and I congratulate you and give you kudos for all the work that you guys are doing in terms of awareness to people, and as well as using the art to help in making people aware of the climate change, which is urgent, and I agree with that. However, let's go down and put our feet in the floor reality. We have an upcoming administration, especially Mr. Trump. For him, climate change is a hoax. Vaccines are dangerous. And I can go on and on and on. How? Remember, more than 50% of the population believe in Trump. So we are all here pretty much preaching ourselves, because I believe if everybody's here, it's because they believe in what things are happening. And art, with the current administration, is meaningless. If we have someone at the top, this is the people we want to make them here to see reality. Remember Trump, when people were forecasting the weather, he wanted to change, no, the hurricane is here, not there, and so on. So my question is, how are we going to overcome the current 4 years that is of gravity in terms of climate change, in terms of weather predictions, in terms of vaccines? I can go on and on. It's just that I'm looking at reality. Even if I love art and I love everything you guys are doing, but this is reality.
You know,
All
I'd
of
like
them
to,
can give me a comment about that.
yeah,
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in, and I want everybody to respond, but I also, thank you for your comments, but I also, having seen what Xavier is doing and seeing what I think other artists are doing, is that the ability to create this space for communities to talk and to create a positive voice. First of all, you're educating. As Adam mentioned, it's like a lot of people just don't know what that means, that your home is going to be underwater. You know, they're not really putting it there. But the thought of bringing the community together as a therapeutic way of getting them to think together, think of solutions together, and not being, you know, in this sort of focus of doom and gloom, but what do we do? How do we imagine as a community the future that we want? And, you know, absolutely, you know, there's tension in our current environment. But I just, you know, I'll step back and let you answer. I wanted to kind of acknowledge the sort of positive approach that this methodology has.
I'd love to answer it, but let me let someone who's going to suffer climate more than I will answer it, and that's the younger guy.
Ready? I think everybody here is going to agree with what you're saying in terms of the reality of the situation, and what the work that we're trying to do. The work that we're trying to do is have in this room and have everybody back in South Florida and everybody who encounters it understand that we all need to be those leaders, those protagonists who are going to mitigate the disasters that are coming. And if we do not take this opportunity to slingshot ourselves into the future that we need, then it's not looking good. And so the work, as was just mentioned so beautifully by JD, is that we need to find ways of breaking through the polarization. Things are incredibly divided. And what this type of approach does is it allows us to disarm ourselves and to not come at it with tension and to just have a conversation. And so I really appreciate what you're saying, because that is it. We need to create places and spaces that do that. And if we can't do that, we're in trouble. And I also want to acknowledge to this point that we're in 2024, where carbon emissions are going like this, but technology is also going like this. So at the same time that we're trying to get folks' attention, everybody's down looking at a screen or with AirPods in. And so we have to break through yet another challenge that we didn't have 20 years ago. And so what the work that we're trying to do and demonstrate for other people, to use, is that we need to make things that are strange enough and weird enough that makes you do a double take and kind of wakes you up a little bit, right? Xavier's reclamation project are these weird mangroves that look like asparagus hanging in a window, And what are they doing there? That is weird, right? And so it's all of us trying to figure out what approaches, what creative solutions can we find in our communities with the challenges that we face so that we can move forward together.
The mangrove project is what he meant, so let's just finish that. So it's a vertical nursery where mangroves used to be. You were a little more diplomatic than I thought you would be. So let me answer your question. Where is she? Where are you, ma'am? We have failed miserably. That is why 51% of Americans did what they did. We failed to explain to them how climate is real to them. We failed because we did not let them feel the problem, right? We went to business as usual. Now more than ever, actually. What now? Now more than ever, we need to find ways of engaging society. This project, by the way, the one that Adam just talked about with the mangroves, was about creating wetlands, and it's about protecting ecosystems above and below the waterline. The stuff that you and the Sierra Club and I would naturally do. But the audience I want to get to is the group that doesn't have that empathy yet, that's in it for themselves. So this project is about your property. And I try to make the argument from a very selfish, self-serving point of view, which is, if you care about your kids and what they're going to inherit, and you care about your property values, then you should probably look at climate not as an ideological issue, but as a financial issue that's going to impact your home. And if we can use art to disarm, to like look at things differently, not through the prism of politics, but just through the prism of real estate values, through the prism of a tax base, right? Through flood insurance costs.
Or insurance rates.
Right. So my septic tank is gonna make sure that my toilet doesn't flush if the groundwater table is too high. If you look at it from that angle and make it really personal, but also give, like he said, an antidote to despair, right? Give them agency, a methodology for acting, then you can reframe the issue. The last thing I want climate to be is a partisan issue. I would love for Republicans to embrace climate for the love of God. Yes, I want all of us to understand that there's a human issue. How do you do that? By making it relevant to people. And right now, the modalities that we have failed us. So it's about changing systems. It's about changing how we talk, how we educate, how we art, how we science, in a way that brings in the wisdom of community and makes it relevant to them. So it is now more than ever that I want to give the speech I just gave. Now more than ever, we really need art to permeate across all our communities. And we need public art institutions to commission art that creates dialogue with the public, not just putting sculptures in a place to admire, but sculptures that activate the public for the public good. And we need museums that aren't just these white cubes, but museums that inspire new ways of thinking in communities, not a repository of what was, but a pathway to what can be. That's what art can do. That's the power of art. And now more than ever, I think we need it as a society. And I want Americans, I want all of us to love one another, and we can. We just need to show the way, and I think art can help heal and bring us together. I really do.
I want to give Jennifer a moment as a person working with government, with the public, with policy. Would you like to respond?
Well, on a couple of points, thank you. First, I think that, working with community-engaged art and creating pieces that provide these constant reminders about what we care about our ethic, I think that's so critical. When we think about, I can give a variety of comparisons. Reclaimed water, we use purple pipe. Purple pipe in part so you don't confuse it with potable water, but purple pipe also communicates to your community that there's this ethic of conservation, and we have these constant reminders with purple pipe about we care about water. If we're putting in solar systems, not everything should be rooftop. A lot of it's art. You want it on the ground. You want people to see the investment and have this constant reminder about what we care about, and that we want to normalize and create an expectation that you see these investments in your community. Utilizing art to communicate the imperative of climate action is another mechanism, visible reminders everywhere in the community that we're conscious of climate change, we care about what's happening on the ground and the investments that we need to make. So I want to say that in terms of our responsibility of mainstreaming that conversation so that it isn't just about whether it's an R or a D participating. And yes, you can communicate or connect on economics, which we do too, but it is about enabling somebody to get comfortable having and leading a conversation that they wouldn't normally otherwise, that they wouldn't have an entry point that didn't feel divisive. And so it's about providing these tools that allow conversation to transpire in a way that, as you say, it's disarming. It's not one that has to be challenging or antagonistic. It's about the reality of community. So then talking about national politics, you know, I think from a local level, it's easy to say, we've been working on this issue independent of what's happening nationally for several decades. We didn't have the luxury of deciding whether or not we were going to wait for national policy. Would we be better off having strong national policy as drivers and investments? Absolutely. But when that's not happening, what you can continue to capitalize on is the power of the local voice and the fact that the realities are hitting home every day in any community. And so you need to shift gears sometimes in order to reframe that conversation, but I think it's about reminding the community every day about what is at stake, the cost, and having more voices, the non-traditional voices, feel empowered to have that conversation. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thanks for your patience. What's your question?
But I'll answer it very fast. Whatever we build, we gotta comply with building codes and their specifications. So the short answer is yes. Any changes that happen in order to decarbonize concrete still need to meet the building codes. So it is safe, resistant, and more importantly, will last longer.
That's the thing.
And that's in fact probably the most thing. The building usually lasts 50 years. We want them to last 100 to 150. But yes, the short answer is we comply with building codes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, I just want to thank everybody on the panel for the work that you're doing. It's really inspiring, and it's a good reminder that climate change is a socio-technical issue, and it needs socio-technical solutions. My question is for Xavier. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the imagery in the numbers themselves. I mean, they are quite evocative in terms of the way they look, and like I noticed, for example, that number 9 looked like a snake eating its tail. And I imagine there's a lot of intentionality embedded in kind of the visual aspects of the numbers, so I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
Thank you. So when I first conceptualized this project, I was thinking of making the numbers just very simple. Like they were orange and they were Arial or something. I mean, it was just the simplest form, because I didn't want to distract you. Didn't want to take away from it. And then I felt that the numbers needed to be more organic, that they needed to look as if they were, felt, because the numbers mark the property you own. And in many ways, as I use my gestural way of creating, whether I was carving in a Francisco's shop or just drawing the original pencil graphite pieces that you see outside that later became printed, I was just thinking of a life. Everything that you own and care about is probably on that 9 feet above sea level. You know, every memory, your homes, the birthday parties, you know, all your effort, everything you've worked on is in drawers, closets, attics, and hanging on the walls of that place. So I wanted to imbue those numbers with a sense of, I mean, there's some chaos, you know, there's diversions and all that, but it's alive, it's organic, and that's what I meant to do with them. I also made them intentionally black and white because I wanted us to understand that there is truth, that there is science, that there is not a gray area when it comes to this, that the climate is real, that no matter how much the fossil fuel industry wants to sow confusion, as the tobacco industry did, it is true that climate is a problem and people will suffer. So I wanted to make them black and white. And the idea was that as Antarctica in your front yard, my melting ice from Antarctica, melts, that little line will go up. And when that little wavy line of water reaches your home will be underwater, and everything, all your dreams, all your hopes, the place of your memories will be submerged. So my drawings were my way of adding a human, organic, gestural, visceral component to what was vulnerable.
I've also
And the other thing is, it wasn't a snake. It was the beautiful thing about an art piece, and Joshua, I'm sure you're totally in agreement with me, is like when you're done making the art piece, if it's an object, it's no longer yours. It's now a conversation between your creative approach to seeing it and the piece that I created, the same way there was a creative approach when I made it. So that's the whole conversation, that the dialogue that you're having with the art piece. Socially engaged art is different because it takes it a step further. It allows you to make your own art piece. It allows you to model what I did, and you yourself create that social or societal sculpture with it. But in the end of the day, it's really about engagement and conversations.
I could go on because I have a lot of opinions, but I think there's some interesting questions that we want to get on this side of the room.
Hi there. Thank you so much again. Also, I wanted to say to every one of you, I was especially intrigued by Caso, your comments. Excuse me. Professor Caso, your comments about concrete, which I was unfamiliar with, so that was really cool, and I hope that the new form of concrete gets into policy discussion rooms pretty soon, so that it can become policy. But my question is for Mr. Cortada. Sorry, just keeping this so I can get the names. So you mentioned a few times the term 100 years, like in 100 years, your lands will be underwater. I guess my concern when I heard that a few times was just, I think to a lot of people, 100 years is a long time. For instance, longer than most of us will be alive. But I know also that a lot of us in this room are educated and know about things like tipping points. And so I'm wondering sort of how you can incorporate that maybe into either future arts or the art you have when talking about sea levels, about how it matters that, like, even though this may happen over a relatively long scale, the urgency of the action is much more immediate than that.
Yeah, so I have a lot of different projects that focus on different topics. With the Union of Concerned Scientists and the Red Cross, I had elderly people in Hialeah fry eggs on solar panels in 2016 as a way of telling them that if you don't think climate change is going to happen to you and you'll be dead by then, a heat stroke can take care of you this afternoon, right? So I have different interventions depending on what I want to do. In the case of the underwater project, I wanted Floridians, a state that is shaped by water, without a state tax and totally driven by tourism and real estate, for them to know that the tax policy that is going to fund everything in our state was vulnerable. But I also didn't want to freak them out. I wanted to tell them when there's a hurricane, we do everything. We buy the bottled water, we take elderly to higher ground, we do everything we can to prepare for that because it's 3 or 4 days away in a hurricane chart. But something that's a few decades from now, we keep on kicking the can down the road, and that's what humans love to do. So the underwater was a way of helping visualize that. And the reason the end of the century number was important is because what I didn't say here and we always say is that that's what will happen if we do what we're doing now. But we're aiming to have you do things to transfer to a clean energy economy so that that number isn't 6 feet. There's something visually impacting about 6 feet of sea level in Miami because the western part of Miami and Broward County will be submerged. So I'm trying to draw these connections through time. But there's different interventions at different levels that talk about the problem. There's a bunch of stuff around environmental degradation and fish kills that happen with the warming water. We talk a lot about hurricanes. So there's different interventions for different projects. But I understand what you're saying. 100 years sounds too far away. And 100 years will have humans living in it. And if I can make you connect and love with someone, let's call it your grandchild, right? 100 years from now, maybe that'll let you think and vote and pray and shop in a way that is more sustainable. So that was the approach behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question.
I want to make sure we have time to get all the questions, so let's go back over on this side and then we'll come back over here.
Man, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring evening, and just it's very heartwarming to know we have people like you working every day to help our communities. My question is kind of logistical, and it's for Xavier.
And can it be somebody else? Ask Adam. He knows these things.
Sure.
Okay.
It kind of involves you taking the seed of an idea and then bringing it to such a massive community scale. You need buy-in from lots of different partners and sponsors and organizations. I'm curious if you've ever had to get buy-in from a stakeholder who maybe didn't originally realize the power of what you were doing or the importance of it, and how you were able to convince them to get involved.
I mean, so I can definitely, is my mic on? Yes? Okay, so when Xavier started this project as the Underwater HOA, I mentioned briefly that realtors were not happy about it, right? So when this project started, it was actually funded by the mayor and the commissioners of the city of Pinecrest, and it was, understanding the value that Xavier would bring, but then they faced backlash, not just from realtors, but also from homeowners who were concerned that potential buyers were going to think that their homes were going to go underwater, and that there's no point, that it's going to tank the real estate market. So all of this backlash, all of this conflict led to the project actually taking a little bit of a hit. That it actually caused a number of different initiatives as part of the Underwater HOA to not happen. But because the community was actually, the people were the ones leading it, it flourished. And I mean, I think even answering your question, when I heard your question, I thought of Francisco. Like, Francisco, didn't necessarily know about the work that Xavier was doing, but then through the conversations, it's something that just kind of makes sense to people, right? And people just kind of get it. And I think the other layer that I'll add to it is the reason that Xavier has been able to do these things for so long is because he's lived in the community since the 60s. You know what I mean? And he has leaned in. I mean, he often talks about how growing up through race riots and drug wars and Miami as the murder capital of the country. And in going through that, he didn't recoil, he leaned in. And in that process, you meet other people who are doing the same thing. So he is able to be so successful, and we are able to have all of these different connections because he is a known commodity as an artist who is really a community leader who is, he's not seen as this partisan guy who's like this super progressive liberal dude, and there are many Republicans who invite him, right? So it's impressive for anybody else to watch and see his ability to navigate all of these systems and institutions, and I think it's something that we encourage people to see as a lens for how to be effective and successful in this space that can be so divided.
And I would add, there's a fundamental value to what it's doing, right? And you see through that, there's many other art or other initiatives that maybe are more superficial, and they grow and then they disappear because there was no fundamental value to it. I think that people see through that. We're all humans. We understand when something is valuable and when it's valuable for you personally, and I think that's the other thing, you bring it home, right? And if you have those two things, then it goes forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go over to this side, please. Thank you.
Hi. Just want to say I'm super excited to see you all here. I'm a proud University of Miami alumni.
Yay, let's go Canes.
I should say alumna. I went there for my undergrad and my master's. My mom lives there. My grandparents are in Broward. So this issue is like really near and dear to me, and really excited to have you here in DC, where I currently live. My question is really, so the literature, like the scientific literature shows that information doesn't change people's minds. It's really that when an issue resonates with them and people care about something, that they take action. And so for me, like this whole conversation has really been about connecting with each other and connecting with nature. And I think you all have like really figured out how to do that. And I work in the advocacy space now. I spent the last 2 days running around the Hill with partners talking about the National Environmental Policy Act, super wonky, and like, it's hard sometimes to figure out how to connect with people in that meaningful way, and I think there are just so many lessons from like this artistic space that I would love to like hear tips or suggestions about how we can be thinking more creatively about how we can incorporate this into the work that we're doing, and whether that's through storytelling or, you know, maybe just showing your art, but any sorts of things that maybe have been successful for you or ideas you have for me, and I'm sure there are other people in this space who work in advocacy too. It is DC after all, but would love to hear anything on that, because I think what you're doing is really important and it's clearly having an impact. So just want to say thanks, and anything I'd love to know.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out to us. I mean, we'll be at the reception. But the short end of it is value your community as an advocate, value your community, and bring them in. I think a lot of environmental groups, out of efficiency, give talking points or pamphlets or, you know, approaches for community members to do things. And unless you're a true believer, you know, that sometimes falls short. In many ways, this past election is a good example on how that happened in door-to-door knockings versus stuff that happened more organically on social media channels. So to do true advocacy, it's find a way of getting the people that you're trying to help or serve, understand that they too are part of the conversation. To do that, you need to value them and bring them in, like get the community wisdom, and then use art. And I mean all sorts of arts. It could be dancing, it could just anything that is a creative activity that builds upon itself and shares. Do that, and I think your advocacy efforts will be strengthened. And I've done this with physicists on Capitol Hill. Like, you can do this, right? I'm not sure who your team is, but there's a way of just bringing art into a space that allows all the participants to see themselves and their roles a little bit different. So if you give them that sense of personal role, and then you give them a platform where their creativity can shine, I think you're going to be able to do that in these difficult times. But we'll talk afterwards. Okay.
I would add, you know, people, as you said, the numbers, they don't remember what you tell them, but they remember how you make them feel, right? And I think, again, back in when we were working with Adam and Xavier, you know, he made me feel, right? And I think ultimately, even the headaches that came after don't really matter, right? Because of that. So I think, and again, I tried to put only 2 graphs, as I said, because it doesn't matter what the graphs, the X and the Y was, but it's about developing that feel. And the feel can be both positive and negative, right? It's provoking, and I think that's part of art, right? Of the communicating, if it's a provocative thought, both positive and negative, and engaging that. So yeah, it doesn't matter what you say, it matters how you make them feel, I think. Yeah.
I just wanted to share that from it's kind of a different standpoint, but on the technical side, it is about capitalizing, unfortunately, on certain events and translating that to the climate scenarios. So while we were experiencing a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event, well, guess what? It also is the same exact water level that we model in the combination of 3 feet sea level rise with storm surge, rainfall intensification, and high tide. You think that sounds extreme and that all those things together can't occur? Well, guess what? It didn't take 100 years. We saw the exact same water levels 18 months ago. And how did that make us feel? We saw what the quality, what the life disruption was. We saw what the personal loss was. We saw the inability of our community to be able to respond to those conditions. And so whether it's that type of event or the extreme heat, being able to pull upon, we all are seeing people that we care about being impacted, or we've been impacted ourselves. In South Florida, it's happening regularly. So I think utilizing these tools to connect to, you know, incidents, things that are already transpiring in the community that are challenging what it means to be part of our community, to think about the prospects for our children in our community, the cost of living in a community that's trying to contend with this all the time. So we can use those experiences that are very raw and real every year in the climate conversation. And how much can you take? How much can you really afford? And those who can least afford preparation can least afford the impact. So I think, try to pull all of that experiential learning together in the climate conversation and what it really means to invest in our community and hedge against the worst through action.
I just want to add quickly, I mean, I am in no position to offer advice to people talking to people on the Hill, but I would just say, in light of what my co-panelists here have just said, that it seems to me that that it is about stories and it is about emotions. And fear is part of that, there's no question. And there's lots of reason to be afraid, and we do feel fear. But love and hope are a huge part of it. And I think that's kind of emerging a little bit in the question and answer period here, is that people doing good work out of love for each other and themselves and their children and future generations and so on is something that people respond to better than they respond to fear, I think. And it's, well, whatever. One excellent book on this topic is by a scholar in California named Sarah Jaquette Ray, called A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet. And she's great about, and she talks about her own transformation as a college professor, about how she talked to students. She used to try to disabuse them of all their false notions and kind of make them more cynical. And then she realized that really wasn't the way to work with them, right? That she had to work with them from a position of kind of love and support. So that's the one thing I would add.
100%.
Thank you.
And you said love at the end of your talk, which I thought was really important. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And our final question.
Again, thank you for such an enlightening and varied talk. I think one thing that was touched upon a little bit was climate migration, and I think we're seeing that becoming an increasing issue with people coming to this country, but increasingly it's going to be internal displacement is going to be more and more of an issue. We can see how that could be the case in 100 years when people can't live in their homes. And so that got me thinking, I guess this can relate certainly to art, as you were talking about art, but possibly to policy as well. You talk about art as social engagement. How do you think about it, especially way down the line, thinking about the fact that sort of climate change is an inherent disruptor to community? It's going to move people around, it's going to break communities up. So how do you think about art down the line in sort of in that environment, and perhaps also policy as well?
We've begun to visualize what a wetter Miami looks like in the short term. So we really have projects where we literally look at Miami and we draw out what's going to happen to this neighborhood versus that neighborhood. It's a way of imagining a positive future. I mean, all of this is really built on that. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't hopeful. I mean, this is because I think we can do something about it. So a lot of the art, very little of the art I do is protest art. I think protest art has a really important role. But my art is really about bringing people together to problem solve. And I need to make them aware of the problem, which is why I tell them what their elevation is. But then I convene them into, okay, what are some of the short-term solutions? Septic tanks, adaptation, lowering our emissions of carbon. And longer term, which neighborhoods are going to become water reservoirs and lose the tax base? And how are we going to help those families who spent their entire lives building equity in a home that's going to be worthless navigate a different future? And I think that's where art can help shape policy. It can allow us to, like I did at CERN, it's how do you visualize big data? Well, art allows you to data visualizations. Well, how can you visualize speculative coastlines? How can you visualize what immigrants from the Caribbean basin can do to build Miami the way that Cubans did during the Cuban Revolution, help build Miami? Are there things that can happen if we allow ourselves? And I think what art does it gives you that space to be able to come together and ideate and do it in a way that isn't adversary, because the whole purpose is collaborative. So yeah, I think art serves all those roles in technology and policy and science. And part of what I think an exhibit like this, and more importantly, I think a conversation like this aims to do, right? To have each of you go into your own spaces and figure out how you can be creative forces in whatever work, field, or project you're involved with, how you can use art to bring in other voices that aren't represented, but also how to have real conversations where you talk with someone who doesn't agree with you as opposed to bark at them. And I think art allows you to do that. And I think more and more America needs to learn how to work together and learn together to build a better society.
If I can just take it in a slightly different direction as well, thinking about, I mentioned technology earlier, right? And you're talking about the future of climate migration. In 10 years from now, in 20 years from now, what is the technology going to look like? How much more connected are we going to be? Are we going to be using virtual reality to be, in the metaverse? Like, and obviously some people, not all people, but the point that I'm trying to make is, how can we, as artists, as creative beings, leverage the tools that we have at our disposal, which have become incredible tools for communication? As you can see on TikTok or Instagram, obviously there are downfalls to these things as well. But if people can see them as this incredible tool for sharing resources, for sharing strategies, right? Like, imagine if we had influencers talking about regenerative agriculture and rainwater catchment, and, there are those people exist, but they're not necessarily getting viewership like Joe Rogan is, right? So how do we start to understand that we all have cameras and pads on our phones? How can we use those to share our thoughts and ideas with people in a way that is really impactful? I think that's another question to consider.
I'll respond from a very different angle. In terms of the policy standpoint and thinking about what it means to community fabric and community integrity. I mean, we're in a deep housing crisis in South Florida, like many other parts of the country, but horribly severe. And in the affordability issue is a great challenge. And when you think about climate change and the impacts and the infrastructure that's needed and the cost of insurance, I mean, one of the best ways that we can help protect and keep people in a community that they can afford is through the investments in infrastructure. I mean, we've done a lot of the economics, preserving $20 billion in insured structures, allowing 70% of the population to maintain flood insurance, which will not be affordable if we don't invest in flood risk reduction. But we're desperately concerned about community affordability and what's happening in terms of the pressures that climate change exerts. I hope that through, economics resonates with some portion of the community, but it's not going to be the driver for everyone. So it is about creating the necessary touch points, and I think that through the climate art, you're able to help generate a vision, the inspiration, a path forward that creates insights as to opportunity, how we evolve as community, how we create spaces that provide preservation of our whole fabric. I mean, that's the vision that we need to construct. And then on the policy and the investment side, we need to make sure that we're not delayed. The longer that we take, the more we cut off those opportunities because we can't afford the investments that are needed to support our community. So utilizing the art to help that conversation, to help and generate that sense of urgency, opportunity, and vision, while creating a demand from the public side to support the investments that we have to make on the policy and planning side in with the public leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So thank you all for offering this, these questions for this conversation, and thanks to the panelists for doing this. So we come to a part of our program called Community Share. We've been doing this for 13 years. This is our community sculpture, and so we're going to take everything that you've taught us, and we're going to turn it back, and we're going to listen to the community. This is where we invite you to come take the microphone. If you're part of art science collaboration, if you're looking for partnerships, you just want to share the work that you're doing that might inspire others. This is as we go into the reception, this is your opportunity to stand up and say, come find me, I'm looking for a partner, I'm looking for a collaborator. So it's 30 seconds to share who you are. It's speed dating for creative people, right? So we're back over here, please.
I'm back again. Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm a photographer, graphic designer, and artist. I met an artist here a year ago, and we got together and formed an environmentally focused arts collective in DC. Thanks. So really inspired by all of the kind of community level work you're doing. That's kind of what we're aspiring to. So we do pop-ups. We have one coming up in December, but also are looking for kind of cross-sector collaborations with environmental organizations, policy organizations, really anybody who wants to do kind of anything collaboration and needs creative minds to come do a talk, workshop, or whatever we want to dream. So please come chat.
But yeah, so take notes of who you want to talk to during the reception, and please go find out more about this collaboration. Over here.
Hello, I'm Julianne. I am the founder of Capital Fringe. It's a nonprofit here in DC, and I run a program called Down to Earth, and it is centered at the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. The Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens will be completely gone in 5 years. It will be flooded. Through a partnership with the National Park Service and the Friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. We're going into our 2nd year. We have 2 commissioned artists who will be producing work to communicate the flooding, not just in the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, but also in the surrounding communities. So I am super excited to be here at the DASER. This is my first time. I've lived in DC for 20 years. I'm so glad I found you. I got an invite yesterday, and I'm so enlivened by this conversation, and I appreciate being invited, and I can't wait to speak to more of you later today. Thank you.
Well, we're doing another one in December, so you have to come back. Over here.
My name is Rockwell Clancy. I'm a research scientist in global engineering ethics at Virginia Tech. I just moved up to DC, so I'm super happy to be here. So a lot of our work focuses on the influences of education and culture on understandings of value judgments surrounding technology. And so one of the projects we're working on right now is how education, professional backgrounds, and culture affect understandings of the use of AI in different types of art, whether it be music, whether it be storytelling, things like that. And so differences, for instance, between how engineers think about that versus politicians, and then how Americans versus Chinese think about that type of stuff. And so we're looking for partners to gather data and then, conduct studies. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Over here.
Hi, I'm an award-winning filmmaker based in DC. I'm producing a documentary film on the preservation of indigenous culture. I'm looking at the Caribbean island of Dominica, which was hit devastatingly by hurricanes recently. It elected its first female Carib chief, and it's looking to the future, but the future is at risk. It's where my mother and grandmother's from. She achieved U.S. citizenship at 99 years old. She lived to 103, and she had very clear memory, sharing the lived history. So, one target audience is people who don't believe in climate change, but cherish the preservation of family and culture, which are at risk of washing away. So the film seeks to heal family and land.
Thank you. Over here.
Back again, and another shout out to this community. I'm a playwright and a writer, and because of this community, I met a theatre producer in DC, and we are hosting a stage reading at the Center for American Progress on December 3rd about kind of the use and abuse of artificial intelligence and how it's impacting everyday people. The play itself is about how people getting deep-faked and sort of the ethical implications of the fact that the laws at the moment are completely inadequate related to that, and it's whetting the appetite for a play production that we're going to be doing next year about social media content moderation as well. So just a real shout out to this community, because we wouldn't have connected if it wasn't for this. So thank you.
Just a plug real quick, we will be doing another reading here on this stage with the Shakespeare Theater Company on Monday night. So please come back. We'll be doing, this is our 15th year collaborating. The very first play that we did with them was Inherit the Wind, and we're going to do that again on Monday. So please come back.
Hi, everyone. My name's Joy, and I'm a climate cartoonist. Thank you, panelists, so much for this evening. It's been amazing. And as a climate cartoonist, I've mostly worked with, the science art nexus with NSF, some NGOs, and most recently with a climate mental health journal that's interactive for participants to use as they walk through mental health issues. And I'm just really excited about the power of comics to unify people, to scroll through easily on your phone, to grab people's attention. So I'm really interested in any partnerships where a comic could add a visual appeal to a scientific issue like climate change. And so I'm definitely excited to chat about artist collectives and any opportunities here to combine our artistic powers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel and evening. My name is Nicole Renberg-Peel. I'm actually the project manager for a program at NASA called the Earth Information Center. Our entire program is really focused on inviting the public to explore our changing planet because we know that climate change is an issue that creates challenges across the globe. So some of my colleagues and myself are here this evening, so we look forward to networking with some of you and talking about some of the lessons that you've learned and exchanging information of what we've learned. Thank you.
One request, Valentine, would you come to the microphone and introduce yourself? Your work at the NSF is, for so many reasons, part of why we're here today.
Well, thank you. First, I should say that I'm gladly retired from NSF. I was very happy working there, but I'm also very happy in retirement. But it's great to see Xavier. One of the things that I did at NSF was manage the Antarctic Artists and Writers Program. And Xavier, I'm so impressed and inspired by how much your time in Antarctica has inspired you to do what you're doing now. So
it was transformative. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I think you are a shining example of why it's so important to bring scientists and artists together. For those of you who might be interested in the Antarctic Artists and Writers Program, it's no longer managed internally by a program officer such as me. It is now managed by the University of Oregon State University, but you can still find it online. Unfortunately, because of COVID and the rebuilding of the stations in Antarctica, there's only one artist going this current year, and that person will be ship-based. But hopefully, when the backlog from COVID and the rebuilding of the station has been completed, it will bloom again. So, but thank you so much, and thank you, JD, for bringing this really wonderful panel together.
Valentine, thank you for all your work you've done.